The air at Auschwitz was always the same. Sharp, burnt-smelling, and hopeless. The breaths of the prisoners, shivering as they lined up for the 5 o'clock roll call, mingled with the chimney smoke, as if they were the last fragments of spirit escaping their bodies. The sky was leaden and low. It hung over the camp like a tomb lid. And it rained constantly. Not snow, not rain, ash. A gray, fine, desolate rain mixed with human ashes. With every breath, this dust gritted between the teeth and coated the lungs. All the sounds of the camp seemed buried beneath this pile of ashes. The muffled thud of SS guards' boots sinking into frozen mud, the murmurs of people exhausted by hunger, and the incessant hum of a machine, its source never fully discernible, coming from behind the curtain, maddening in its constant presence. Nurse Klara was part of that machine. In fact, she was not a nurse. Klara Wolff, age 27, was a woman who had studied medicine in Berlin and dreamed of a bright future. The war had dragged her here to the camp infirmary known as the Revier, where death and healing were intertwined. Here her title was SS Helferin. Her job was to select those who could be healed and to send the others to this special procedure. Her hands no longer held a stethoscope. They held a pen to make lists. Lists. Always lists. Those dreadful lists where life and death were separated by a single stroke. Her face was like a patch of plaster on the wall. Expressionless, cold, marble-like. Her blue eyes, once sparkling, were now dull and penetrable like the surface of a frozen lake. An angel who dealt death. This nickname had arisen from the frightening combination of her beauty and her coldness. Klara heard this name. Nothing stirred inside her anymore. Everything inside her had frozen, just like the swamp surrounding the camp. One afternoon, a new group was brought to the infirmary. The people were exhausted, their eyes wide with fear, huddled together as they were dragged along. Klara scanned them routinely, without looking at the list in her hand. Then her eyes fixed on a single point. The woman was perhaps in her early 20s. She stood there like a ghost, clad in ashen rags. But her face reminded Klara of something she had left behind in another life, far away. Resilience. She was a prisoner of fear, yes, but in the depths of her eyes there was an unquenchable spark, a kind of noble bearing. Her name, as Klara would later read on the list, was Leah. Beside her stood a young man, frail but upright, who seemed to be protecting her, almost wrapping his arms around her. His face was gaunt, bearing the marks of hunger and suffering. But the moment he looked at Leah, those marks softened, transforming into a human warmth. His name was Jakob. Klara raised her pen to make a mark next to Jakob's name. At that moment, an SS guard came up to them with quick steps and struck Jakob's shoulder hard. "Du, komm mit." "You, come with me." Jakob's body froze for a moment. He looked into Leah's eyes. They did not speak, but in that look were all the goodbyes, all the loves, all the pains in the world. Klara saw the expression on Leah's face as she turned her gaze from Jakob to Klara at that very moment. It was not such helplessness, such bottomless fear. Rather, it was a plea. A silent, proud, but heart-wrenching plea. As if she were searching for something in the depths of Klara's eyes that she had long believed to be dead. The pen in Klara's hand remained suspended in midair. That moment lasted perhaps less than a second, but for Klara, time stood still. Her hearing became acute, a child crying from the neighboring barracks, a dog barking in the distance, the sound of blood flowing through her own veins, and the almost audible rustling of the ashes gathering on her coat shoulder. The SS guard tugged at Jakob. The first crack in Klara's icy surface formed at that very moment. There was no reason for it. It defied logic. It could have been her end. But that look, Leah's look, awakened something within Klara that she had forgotten. Humanity. He lowered his pen next to Jakob's name, but he didn't make a mark. Instead, he put a meaningless, random symbol on the list he was holding. Then he looked up at the SS guard. His tone was his usual monotone, without a flicker. 9. Dieser bleibt. Die Liste sagt, ist für die Baustelle vorgesehen. Ein Ingenieur, soweit ich sehe. Lassen Sie ihn. No. He stays. The list says he's assigned to the construction site. An engineer, as far as I can see. Leave him. The SS guard looked at Klara in astonishment. It was not customary for a nurse in the infirmary to oppose him on a matter of choice. But the weight of Klara's nickname, Todesengel, and the uncompromising expression on her face overpowered him. The man grumbled, pushed Jakob aside, and turned to another prisoner. Jakob fell back, breathless, to Leah's side. Leah's eyes were fixed on Klara this time. They held a mixture of doubt, fear, and indescribable gratitude. Klara ignored their stares. She bowed her head and moved on to the next name on her list. Her heart pounded in her chest like a foreign object. In that moment, she felt that Nurse Klara was dead, and that something very dangerous was being reborn. This was a beginning, and everything that began at Auschwitz ended in death. The following weeks passed in the camp's merciless routine. Winter reigned with bone-chilling severity. Every morning after roll call, frozen corpses were lined up in front of the barracks, death's daily harvest. Klara carried on with her work. She filled out the lists. She made the selections. But she was no longer an automatic machine. Inside, a silent earthquake had occurred, and the tremors did not cease. Leah and Jakob were held in B-Lager, in a section where the women's and men's barracks were relatively close. Klara could not stop herself from observing them. It was not surveillance, but rather an investigation. A silent investigation into how the thing called human could still exist in this hell. She saw them during the winter clothing distribution. Tattered coats were fought over in the hope of not freezing. Jakob quickly draped his share, a torn coat, over Leah's shoulders. Leah tried to protest, but she couldn't resist the certainty in Jakob's gaze. At that moment, the guard struck Jakob, saying the coat belonged to him. Jakob fell, got up, and staggered on. The pain on Leah's face was like a physical blow. On another occasion, Leah was among a group of women brought to the infirmary to be washed. Klara was supervising the procedure. As Leah shivered under the cold water, she took out a small, flat stone she had hidden in her wrist and held it in her palm. It was such a thin, insignificant object that no one noticed. But Klara saw the expression on Leah's face as she looked at that stone. A refuge, a memory, perhaps an object of prayer. In Auschwitz, a stone was a treasure. Jakob was in the construction commando. Every evening, exhausted and covered in mud, on his way back to his barracks, he would pause for a moment near the barbed wire fence he passed and look at the women's barracks in the distance. Sometimes, by chance, Leah would be there too. For a few seconds, their eyes would meet, without speaking, without any sign. It was their daily ritual, their silent ceremony of clinging to life. One day, Klara observed this small ritual. Jakob standing like a statue on one side of the barbed wire, and Leah on the other, a faint smile appearing on her face. Between them lay barbed wire, the risk of death and miles of destruction. But in that glance, all of that seemed to melt away, something Klara had long forgotten. Envy, or rather an intense longing, awoke painfully within her. It was a bond she could never have, perhaps didn't even deserve. One afternoon, in the infirmary, one of the prisoners brought to Klara was a young girl dying of typhus. She was burning with fever, delirious. Klara, going through the routine, was about to add her to the special treatment list when she felt the girl's hand, unconsciously, cling to the hem of Klara's white coat. It was such a weak, such a naive touch. Klara withdrew her hand. That night, when she returned to her barracks, the relatively warm and clean room reserved for SS personnel, she sat in front of the mirror for a long time. Was the face she saw in the mirror the face of a monster? Or was there still a human being hidden inside the thing that had created this monster? The next day, she found an excuse to speak to the capo in charge of B Lager. She arranged for Leah to be temporarily assigned to cleaning the infirmary. It was less strenuous work, increasing her chances of survival. She did the same for Jakob, transferring him to a job guarding the door, a job where they could see each other and occasionally whisper a word or two. These actions were completely irrational. If discovered, each one would put them in danger. But for Klara, it was a kind of penance, a silent penance, unknown to anyone, perhaps not even fully understood by herself. Did Leah and Jakob understand the source of these unexpected chances? Probably. Every time Leah was brought to the infirmary, she would give Klara a deep and meaningful look, though not as intense as on that first day. There was no fear in that look now. It was questioning, measuring. One evening, as dusk fell over the camp, Klara was looking out of the window of the building where the SS officers stayed. Below, the prisoners were gathering for the evening roll call. Among them, she saw Jakob and Leah. Only a few meters and a few guards stood between them. Jakob, seizing the opportunity, had nodded towards Leah, almost imperceptibly. Leah's face lit up with a faint glow. At that moment, Klara felt the first and last smile she would ever experience at Auschwitz. It was a faint, pained, but genuine smile. These two people, in the midst of this hell, were carrying hope to each other. And by allowing this hope, Klara was perhaps saving a part of her own soul. But hope was the most dangerous prohibition in Auschwitz, and Klara, without realizing it, had broken that prohibition. Eyes were everywhere, especially on someone like her, nicknamed the Angel of Death. A silent agreement had begun, yes, but the price of that agreement would soon be paid at a cold dawn. The days at Auschwitz passed with a relentless monotony, days blending into weeks, weeks into months. But for Jakob and Leah, thanks to Klara's quiet interventions, life had become almost bearable. This was a relative term, of course. There was still hunger, cold, fear, and the constant threat of death. But at least they knew each other was there, and they could carry on their days with those brief, meaningful glances. Leah was in Klara's line of sight as she cleaned the infirmary. Klara watched her meticulous, silent work. Leah never spoke, but once, She had slowly and carefully replaced a fork Klara had left on her desk. This small gesture was like a relic of civilization. Another day, Klara saw Leah wiping the forehead of a dying child with a damp cloth. At that moment, Klara's heart tightened. How many children's death warrants had she signed? Unsigned, nameless, but with deadly strokes. Jacob, in his job at the gate, had unexpectedly provided a benefit. His sharp eyes and engineering mind enabled him to notice a crate that had become loose in the back of a lorry and was about to fall out. The crate contained valuable medical supplies. Jacob took the risk and alerted an SS soldier. It was a minor incident, but the SS soldier, perhaps thinking that those supplies might save his life, gave Jacob a piece of hard bread. Jacob split the bread in two. He hid one half in a crack they had previously agreed upon, near the women's barracks, as he passed by the next day. Leah found it. That piece of bread was not just food. It was a love letter. Perhaps the most touching love letter ever written in the most cruel place in the world. Klara noticed this small exchange. And this time, the feeling that awakened within her was not just longing, but a deep loneliness. She was caught between two worlds, the world of the executioners and the world of the victims. She belonged to neither. Her home in Berlin, her family, her dreams, it all felt like it was on another planet. Here, those who called her the angel of death and those who feared her were actually saying the same thing. You are not one of us. One winter morning, an order came from the camp command. Due to increasing losses on the Eastern Front, a Labour battalion composed of able-bodied male prisoners was to be transferred to another concentration camp, an ammunition factory. The list was being prepared. When Klara saw this list, her heart sank. Jakob's name was written in large letters at the top of the list. The transport was in 2 days. This meant almost certain death, either during the transport, in the airless, empty wagons, or in the harsher conditions at the destination camp. The moment Jakob left, Leah's reason for clinging to life would be gone. Klara knew this. Observing those glances, that silent communication, now meant something to her too. They were the last witnesses to Klara's humanity. That night, Klara couldn't sleep. From her bedroom window, the moonlight falling on the camp cast the sharp shadows of the towers and barbed wire onto the ground. The coal fogged up the glass. Klara knew what she had to do. This was a much bigger, much more dangerous step than her previous small interventions. Logic was holding her back. Fear had settled in her lungs. But that new, awakening, painful thing inside her, conscience, humanity, madness, whatever it was called, was stronger. The next day, around noon, Klara went to a relatively secluded storage area behind the camp's administrative building. This was where empty boxes and crates were discarded. She had calculated a time when no one would see her. A few minutes later, Leah arrived with quiet steps. Her face was filled with deep concern. She had heard that Jakob was on the transfer list. Sie haben mich rufen lassen? Did you call me? She whispered, her voice trembling. Klara looked into her eyes. Her mask was gone now. Her face showed exhaustion, regret, and determination. Jakob geht morgen. Jakob is leaving tomorrow, she said simply. The color drained from Leah's face. Her knees felt like they would buckle, but she stood firm. Tears began to flow from her eyes, but she made no sound. Only a tremor of a sob caught in her throat. Klara spoke faster, her voice low and sharp. There is a way, only one. But it's insanely dangerous. For all of you. Leah looked at Klara without wiping her eyes. Hope sprouted like a seedling from within fear. What? Klara held her breath. What she was about to say was treason. High treason. She could be punished by death. Im Krankenrevier. Es gibt einen Raum. Ein Abstellraum für Leichen, die abgeholt werden. Wird heute Nacht nicht kontrolliert. Die Tür ist nur verriegelt, nicht verschlossen. In the infirmary, there is a room. A storage room used for collecting corpses. It won't be checked tonight. The door is only bolted, not locked. Leah held her breath, trying to understand. Jakob, tonight after roll call, he must wait near the latrines. There is a gap there, not in the main fence, in the inner fence. He can cross it. I will be there. I will lead him into the room. Leah's eyes widened. Could this be a trap? A game Klara had set up to lure them into a trap. But the pain in Klara's eyes was so real. And then, Leah asked, her voice barely audible. Klara swallowed with difficulty. Morgen früh kommt der Wagen für die Leichen. Ein gewisser Fahrer, ich kenne ihn. Er ist nicht überzeugt, wird 2 Säcke mehr laden, ohne nachzuschauen. Der Wagen fährt zum Krematorium, aber nicht direkt hinein. Es gibt eine Kurve, ein Schlagloch, dort, wo die Wache nicht direkt hinsieht. Der Fahrer wird langsamer werden. Ihr müsst dann hinausspringen, in den Wald laufen. Es ist eure einzige Chance. Tomorrow morning, the car for the corpses will come. A certain driver, I know him. He's not convinced. He'll load 2 more bags without looking. The car will go to the crematorium, but not directly inside. There's a bend, a pothole, where the guards don't look directly. The driver will slow down. Then you'll have to jump. Run into the forest. It's your only chance. He paused. The weight of what he had said hung heavy in the air. Leah knew this plan was crazy, that 1,000 things could go wrong, but at the same time, she knew it was a better chance than Jakob's death. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she looked at Klara. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. This time, there was no fear or suspicion in her voice, only pure, unadulterated curiosity. Klara didn't take long to respond. The answer was already inside her, bleeding like a wound. Weil ich es kann. Weil ich es muss. Because I can. Because I have to. The 2 women stood in the cold storage room, looking at each other. Something passed between them that words couldn't describe. An agreement, a confession, a farewell. Leah nodded slightly. Wir werden da sein. We will be there. Leah walked away silently. Klara stood there for a while longer. Her hands were shaking. She had just signed her own death warrant. And strangely, in that moment, for the first time since arriving at Auschwitz, she felt completely at peace. That night, an unusually clear, freezing sky descended over Auschwitz. The stars shone coldly and distantly, as if they were distant eyes ashamed to witness the atrocities here. The roll call was completed amid the usual noise and tension. The guards watched the masses of prisoners being herded towards the barracks. Jakob, his heart pounding in his chest, had hidden in the shadows behind the toilet block. The plan Leah had told him about during their secret meeting that afternoon was unbelievable. But he remembered the strange, wounded seriousness in Klara's eyes. This couldn't be a trap. Traps were simpler. This was something much more complex, much more human. He knew about that small gap in the inner wire fence. A few wires at the base of a post had lifted off the ground. No one had bothered to repair it. It was a dead zone anyway. Holding his breath, he crawled towards the darkness. Every crackle exploded in his heart like a gunshot. He reached the gap. Crawling on his stomach, he passed under the barbed wire. His coat tore, his skin was scratched, but he didn't feel it. He was on the other side. A shadow emerged from the corner of a shed. It was Klara. They didn't speak, just a glance. Klara nodded for him to follow her. They entered the dim, antiseptic-smelling corridor through the back door of the infirmary. They came to the door of the morgue. Klara pushed the bolt. The door creaked open with a chilling squeak. The room was freezing cold and reeked of death. Traces of frozen mist were visible on the walls. On the floor lay empty stretchers and a pile of dirty linen sheets, cutting to squares. Leah was already inside, shivering in a corner. As soon as she saw Jakob, she rushed towards him. For a moment, the whole world disappeared within that embrace. A silent, tear-choked but intense embrace. Klara waited at the door, her face turned to the wall. She allowed them this moment. Just a few seconds. "Hurry," she whispered finally. "Take the cloths. Wrap yourselves in them. Cover yourselves with the empty stretchers too. The car will be here at 5 in the morning. The driver won't touch the 2 bags on top. Do you understand?" Leah and Jakob nodded. Their faces showed a determination mixed with fear. Klara took 2 small, hard pieces of bread and a few slices of dried vegetables from her pocket. She handed them over. "Take them. It will be a long journey." As Leah took the bread, she touched Klara's hand. It was ice cold. "Danke," Leah said, her voice breaking. "Wir werden es nie vergessen." We will never forget. Klara smiled bitterly. It was a farewell smile. "Leben Sie," she whispered. "Live." That was all. And she closed the door, pushed the bolt back, but did not lock it. The sound of her boots echoing in the corridor grew fainter and fainter. The night was a nightmare for Jakob and Leah. The cold seeped into their bones. The stench of death filled their lungs. The darkness was absolute. Only the warmth of each other's breath and the sound of their heartbeats kept them from going mad. They did not speak. There was no need to speak. Their hands constantly sought each other out, sound each other, held each other tightly. It was a life-giving elixir. When the first light of dawn began to seep through the dirty window pane, the sound of engines could be heard outside. Their hearts pounded as if they would leap from their chests. The door opened. 2 SS assistants entered, muttering. They began to take the body bags on the stretcher. Klara had been right. They didn't even touch the top 2 bags, the empty ones that covered Jakob and Leah. They only took the ones below, counted them, and carried them outside. Then someone else came. These were heavier, slower steps. It was the driver, the man Klara had mentioned. He also walked towards the pile of empty bags. He paused for a moment. Jakob and Leah held their breath under the cloths. Then the man's hands lifted the stretcher covering them. Light seeped through the cloth. The man didn't move for a moment. Then he slowly put the stretcher back down. He said nothing. He just picked up the 2 empty bags on top, hoisted them onto his shoulders, and carried them outside. He threw them into the back corner of the truck, on top of the other bags. The lorry's engine started up again. They moved off. Every bump pounded Jakob and Leah's bones. The cold was unbearable, but inside them, a wild, uncontrollable hope was flaring up. The forest, the bend and the hollow Klara had mentioned. The sounds outside were changing, from the sounds inside the camp to the sounds of a more open area. The wind was beating the truck's tarpaulin more violently. Then, the truck slowed down. It entered a sharp bend. The driver shifted down a gear. This was it. Jakob squeezed Leah's hand. It was the signal. They threw the blankets off them. The lorry hit a pothole and shook. At that moment, the rear curtain of the box, which had been cut beforehand by the driver with a palette knife in a place that was almost invisible, opened slightly. They didn't hesitate. First Jakob, then Leah, jumped from the moving rear of the lorry onto the frozen bushes at the side of the road. The fall was hard. Jakob sprained his ankle, but felt no pain. He immediately jumped up and pulled Leah to her feet. There was no shout or gunshot behind them. The truck continued on its way, as if nothing had happened. The forest embraced them with its dark, cold but free arms. They began to run. The wind lashed their faces, burning their lungs. But this was the wind of freedom, not the air filled with ashes of Auschwitz. Hand in hand, hearts in their mouths, they ran into the darkness, towards the unknown. Behind them, the smoke rising from the chimneys of the death factory mingled with the dawn. Klara woke up earlier than usual that morning. Her hands were still trembling, but she felt strangely calm inside. She went to her post at the infirmary. Outside, it was a normal day. Roll call, the work commandos setting off, the hum of the camp. The ash rain continued without pause. She hadn't seen the corpse truck leave, but she knew it had passed at 5:30. Now, Jakob and Leah were either free or dead. Their fate was now in their own hands. As for her own fate, Klara tried to focus on her work throughout the day. But her mind was scattered. Every time a door opened, every sound of boots, she sensed danger. In the afternoon, the capo of Block B came to the infirmary with a grim face. 2 prisoners are missing. 1 man, 1 woman. Their names, Jakob Lowy and Leah Cohen. Check the list. Klara's heart stopped for a moment, but her face didn't move. She glanced indifferently at her list. They're not here. Perhaps they were added to another selection list, or the crematorium list. Her voice was as cold as ice. The capo grumbled, but did not object. The camp was large. The records were never perfect. He left. Whenever the late afternoon, danger knocked at the door. The one who opened it was Obersturmführer Erich Wolff. Klara's distant relative, he was also the SS officer responsible for security investigations at the camp. His cold blue eyes reminded her of her own, but his held no mercy, only suspicion. "Klara," he said, closing the door behind him, "there's an investigation. 2 prisoners are missing. The driver in charge of the corpse depot gave inconsistent statements about this morning's shipment. They're questioning him." He fixed his eyes on Klara's face. "You were seen in that area yesterday afternoon, in the depot area, alone. What were you doing?" Klara felt every beat of her heart echoing in the room, but her years of composure served her well one last time. She shrugged slightly. "I was getting some air, Eric. The smell in the infirmary, it can be unbearable sometimes. I needed some fresh air to check the lists." "Fresh air," Obersturmführer repeated, sarcastically. "In Auschwitz? An interesting choice." He took another step closer. "These 2 prisoners, the woman who works in your infirmary, and the man who was admitted at your suggestion, coincidence?" Klara did not avert her eyes from his. "The camp is filled with thousands of prisoners. I deal with hundreds of them. Coincidences are inevitable. Obersturmführer Wolff remained silent for a long time. In the room there was only the faint crackling from the stove and the distant noise of the camp. "You know, Klara," he said finally, his voice low and threatening. "Some call you Todesengel, a fine nickname, but an angel must be faithful to its duty. Angels who fall from heaven, they are no longer angels. They become devils." Klara did not reply. There was nothing to say. Everything was already written on her face. Her mask had completely fallen away. The Obersturmführer nodded, as if confirming something he had expected. "Tomorrow at dawn, at the training ground. Be prepared." He turned and left the room. The sound of the door closing was like a death knell. That night, Klara sat in her room for the last time. She didn't pack her things. She didn't write anything. She just looked out the window into the darkness. She wasn't afraid anymore. It was as if she had been waiting for this for a long time. Her soul had died years ago, when she signed the first death list. Now her body would follow that soul. At dawn, 2 SS guards took her away. She didn't resist, she didn't speak. As they passed through the camp, the prisoners were lining up for roll call. Among them, those from Leah and Jakob's barracks turned their heads to look. They were watching the Totensengel's final walk. There was no hatred or joy on their faces, only a blank, empty bewilderment. Perhaps because he looked like one of them. The training ground was vast and cold. A thin layer of snow that had fallen during the night lay on the frozen mud. The snow, mixed with ashes, formed a dirty gray carpet. He was brought before a wall. There were bullet marks and dark stains on the wall. Obersturmführer Wolff was there. Next to him stood a firing squad. The men's faces were expressionless, just as Klara's used to be. This was simply a job. Klara was offered a last cigarette. She shook her head. She turned her eyes from the wall to the horizon. She looked at the dark line of the forest in the direction Jakob and Leah had fled. Inside her, at that moment, there was an indescribable peace. Perhaps, if they were lucky, they were breathing freely somewhere out there, thanks to her. It was worth everything she had done. "Haft ihr letzte Worte?" "Any last words?" asked Obersturmführer in an official tone. Klara turned to him. Her blue eyes were no longer icy, but clear and calm like a lake. No. She didn't need to be tied up. She was simply told to stand in front of the wall. She did. The air was lit by the gray, lifeless light of dawn. A rain of ash fell lightly. Klara turned her face to the sky. Those small, gray particles melted on her skin. The command came. Fire. Gunshots drowned out the morning noise of the camp for a moment. Birds took flight in fright. Prisoners in the distance flinched. Klara Wolff, the angel of death, collapsed to the ground. Frozen mud covered half her face. Her eyes remained open, staring at the empty sky. There was no guilt, no remorse, no fear left within them. Only a final, icy calm. Obersturmführer Wolff approached, drew his pistol, to fire a final shot, but he stopped. He holstered his weapon. He left her. The SS guards took her away, just like the others. Auschwitz's machine had ground up another cog and continued to turn relentlessly. The ashes slowly began to cover the bloodstains where Klara had fallen. Within a few hours, there would be no trace left. But in that forest, 2 lives trembled, moved forward in fear, yet with hope. They were the sole and final proof of Klara's silent rebellion, her farewell to humanity, and the unexpected mercy of the angel of death. And perhaps, beneath those ashes, a very small, very late, but nevertheless genuine spark of humanity had flashed one last time.